Are you entitled to overtime pay? The Fair Labor Standards Act establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, and youth employment standards for workers in the private sector and government. Covered non-exempt employees are entitled to a minimum of $7.25 an hour and 1.5 times regular pay if they work more than 40 hours a week. This is Michael Caldwell with 8 ways employers attempt to avoid paying overtime. Number 1, using a title. There are exemptions to overtime pay, but giving an employee a management title does not mean that the employer doesn't have to pay overtime. Simply giving an employee who does non-managerial work an executive title does not exempt the employer from having to pay overtime. Number 2, salaried employees. Many people believe that paying an employee a salary exempts them from overtime. This is not true. There is no such thing as a salary exemption from the overtime requirement. Number 3, time off as pay for overtime. Some employers offer comp time in lieu of overtime pay. This is another scam. It is illegal for private employers to offer comp time in lieu of overtime pay to non-exempt employees. Number 4, expanded work weeks. Many employers pay every 2 weeks or twice a month. Overtime is always based on a 7-day week. An employee that works 50 hours in 1 week and 30 hours the following week is entitled to 10 hours of overtime pay for the first of the 2 weeks in which he or she worked 50 hours. Number 5, waiver of overtime rights. If your employer required a signed document waiving overtime pay, that document is worthless. No overtime waiver is valid unless it is approved by the Department of Labor or a federal court. Number 6, independent contractors. Many employers call their employees independent contractors in order to avoid overtime pay. The Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't care what your employer calls you. Facts always trump labels under the law. Most so-called independent contractors are actually employees who are entitled to overtime. Number 7, manipulating tip credits. Employers may reduce hourly wages by $5.12 an hour for employees who receive tips, resulting in a $2.13 hourly wage. There are rules that the employer must follow in order to impose this reduction. Your employer is violating these rules if they require sharing of tips with a house or with employees who don't usually receive tips. By doing this, they lose the right to take the deduction, and they are required to pay the employee $7.25 an hour for every hour they work up to 40 hours. Number 8, commissioned employees. Many employees work on a commission-only basis. Most commissioned employees are entitled to a guarantee of the minimum wage and an additional payment for overtime. I just listed 8 things employers do to avoid paying their employees overtime. There are more, and if you believe you are being cheated out of overtime, or if you're an employer who wants to avoid falling into these traps, call the lawyers at DeLong, Caldwell, Bridgers, Fitzpatrick and Benjamin, the wage and hour experts, at 404-979-3150 for a free consultation, or check out our website at www.dcbflegal.com.